With the Advantex subfloor assembly, you can be sure that you're building a reputation on something stronger. And the best builders, well, they may always stand apart, but they never stand alone. So ask yourself, are you bringing your A game?
Welcome, everybody, to the UnBuild It podcast. I'm your host this week, or this episode, Pete Yost. Got my good fellow podcasters here, Steve Beiser and Jake Bruden.
Hello, hello.
And the topic is books recommended by UBIP, the UnBuild It podcast.
Which is us.
Us.
That's
the three
us.
of us. Okay. So we're going to pull out some favorites, tell you why we like them, and hopefully there's ones that you might pick up.
Does the thesaurus and dictionary count?
It does if you use it for work.
Full disclosure, everybody, Steve, is allowed to do any book they want. It does not have to be related to building. It can just be something that you learned along the way when you used to go to a library a long time ago.
There's this Polish cookbook that my mom used to use to make these like pierogies and głąbki.
What's the ISBN number on it?
Like I got that
International Standard Book.
I know what it
number
is,
ISBN.
but
Okay.
I ain't like I have that number in my back pocket.
Okay.
What I like
Fine.
is the contrast of how softly you're speaking when we talk about books. It's like you're almost in a library. Is that what happened?
I got that he was talking about his mother, and that was why we had
I was
reference.
being respectful to my mom.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Maybe you should.
So I'm going to, since I'm the host, I'm going to ask Jake to go with his book number one.
I'm going to cheat.
I can't wait for this.
I'm going to cheat the system. And
Is everybody sitting on the edge of their seat like I am?
my book number one is not a book.
Of course. Why
Yep.
would it be a book?
Exactly.
We're referencing books and we
Exactly.
asked Jake. So why would it be a book?
But it upholds the idea of a
How
book.
to Hate the Military?
No, it's Fine
Okay.
Home Building and Journal of Light Construction.
Ooh.
I have a standing order with anybody that works for me. If you want those, I will pay for them. And a lot of times I'll just go ahead and order it when they come in. When they start with our firm, I'll go ahead and order those too.
So why those two?
Well, when it comes to readily available information that comes on a regular basis, that's a smaller investment than handing them a big book and saying, please read this for your job. It's easier for me to go, hey, here, this is
Does
an
Fine
hour's.
Home Building come with a subscription, a Green Building Advisor also?
I don't know if it does.
I don't think so.
No,
but
when you buy it.
Don't tell anybody, but I have a subscription that my employees use. That's mine. We cheat the system. Even more so that Brian sent me one for free, and I still give it to my employees. I'm cheap on that.
Wow, full disclosure.
Front. Yeah. It's going to get pulled. They're going to pull that one
You're done.
if they hear this one.
So
See it work,
when
Brian.
you say that you give them access to, is this hard copy to those two
So
or
they
online or both?
they get a hard copy for both, and I believe JLC's subscription comes with the JLC online, but I think Fine Home Building's a separate price for their online stuff, if I remember correctly.
And do you find that either one of those is sort of too focused on cold climate or Northeast, or do you feel like it covers Missouri pretty well?
No, but I would say that even though JLC is shorter, as in it generally has a little bit less content in each month, I do get more. Boy, I'm really going to get him to pull my GBA membership. I'm just saying better things about JLC. I do get more employee questions like, hey, what do you think about this sort of thing? And that may just be the way the content's guided. There's a little bit more homeowner type stuff in Fine Home Building too, but that's part of their audience. So
It's interesting, when we were working to develop Green Building Advisor and we were talking about Fine Home Building and how popular it was, I was completely shocked to learn that more than 50% of the subscribers to Fine Home Building are lay people. They really like having the really high quality graphics as a coffee table, which is fine, right? Because that means
it also
they're-
shows the interest in our industry.
Yep.
I mean,
Yep.
Reisinger's YouTube is that way. Sure, he has almost 1 million subscribers, right? There's not 1 million contractors in the United States. There's not 1 million contractors that watch YouTube.
yeah.
So, I mean, it does reach beyond our industry. That's one of the kind of fun things about our industry. People aren't interested in dentistry the same way they are in home building.
So to do a good segue to my buddy, the High Performance Architect, I'm going to say that one of the books that I like to recommend is Designing the Exterior Wall by Linda Brock. And back when Steve and I were working together at 3D Building Solutions, this would have been about 2005, I got asked by Boston Architectural College to develop an online 8-week building enclosure course. And I said, oh, that's great, but there is no building science or building enclosure book for architects. And so I called John Straub, who is, a Canadian building scientist, teaches at the University of Waterloo, and he said, you're wrong, as usual. There is a book that is about building science for the enclosure for architects, and it just got written and published by Wiley Press this year. So that was the book Linda Brock. She's from the University of British Columbia, I believe. And the reason I like the book is that she says that right up front, architects need to stop surrendering responsibility for the enclosure to consultants.
That's a good way to put it.
And she said that the building science that she relies upon was from folks like John Straub. So when she wrote the book, she went to them to work with them on developing the details. So she right out front says architects should claim responsibility for the enclosure and its performance. And the other thing I like about the book is that many architectural books treat light frame residential construction or building as, they poo-poo it as, we don't need to cover that. So a lot of architectural standard books, they really focus on commercial and type 1, type 2, type 3 construction. Her book has an equal number of chapters and examples of light frame assemblies as commercial buildings. And she makes a point of that at the very beginning to say that all buildings deserve attention to detail, which I thought was pretty cool.
And how many more buildings are there that are light frame wood than there are? I get that there might be a square footage comparison overall once you take into account commercial buildings, but there are a hell of a lot of houses out there.
I will say, though, that so she wrote that book in 2005. I've tried to contact her about, is there going to be a next edition? Because it's now 16 years later, and I haven't heard anything back. So it is a little bit dated at this point, but the content's all still relative. Did I set
dig
you
it.
up?
I want to read that one. I'll have to find it.
Ooh, goody.
So excited.
Come on, buddy. We're friends, right? We've bonded. And
Listen, you're going to be pleasantly surprised with what you're about to hear.
I can't wait.
Are we taking bets? Do you want to bet?
Go ahead. Take bet.
No, I'm on the.
He's not going to
So
bet.
you're going to back out of your
No, he's
proposition.
not gonna bet.
You're going to back.
I am on the edge of my chair.
I'm telling you, you are. Because I'm not even going to, before I give the book, I'm going to give the reason for the book. I sit in the present to read about the past to identify my future. Ooh. How about that?
I sit in the present, reading about the past to plan out my future.
To
Identify my future.
Identify my future.
So, what I actually do enjoy reading is I have the first couple versions of Architectural Graphic Standards. The first edition. I went on and you can get them, used editions through Amazon or whatever. Who's the
eBay.
eBay? That's what I was saying. Yeah. So I got those. So it's really cool because the experience is beyond just reading the book. One, there are the first 2 or 3 editions were hand drawn. So you have this great appreciation for hand drawing, hand lettering, and the artistry of the book.
And when you say the first, was it 1930, 1950?
Yeah, I think it's like the 30s, 39 or 32 or something. It was something like that. I meant to look it up before, but it's the Ramsey Architectural Graphic Standards. I think we're into the 12th or 13th edition or something like that. And these, I have the editions 1, 2. My plan is to collect all of them. I kind of took a sabbatical on after the first 3, but the first one is there's the appreciation of who drew this, who wrote it. It's just really beautiful drawings.
Neat.
2 is the construction back then. They drew things like how to put a staircase together and stuff. So you get to learn all about these little parts. But the identifying the future part, you have to understand that back then they didn't have sealants, tapes, and membranes.
Right.
So everything that they were explaining in those details were details that were totally relying on shedding water, shingle fashion, gravity. So
high capacity of materials, that type of thing.
Exactly. So it's a great reference point to kind of see where we were to identify where I want to go, because I can appreciate tapes and sealants and all of that. I'm not saying that they're not good,
Right.
But
They're
I'm saying
kind of cheat codes, though.
But before I go to that level of a solution, I want to make sure that what I've drawn has the right solution. And it's other things too. I just did this house that was it was a renovation, and it was very labor intensive as far as the interior trim work. Well, we didn't just put up a square stock molding on these. We put up little J style moldings where they rabbited it out. And the reason we did that is so that when the boards shrink, you didn't reveal that edge of the ceiling boards and stuff. And so all of this comes out of these older versions about when they did, you want to say when they did things right, but it was the spirit of the times back then.
Yeah.
And
it was a
doing quality
hands-on
construction.
approach that was different than what it is today.
Yeah, and it's really cool because, you know, when you read the older books, you can kind of see where they were headed, and then we have now the understanding of history to see, did we go where they thought we were going? It's kind of like somebody that's going to listen to the UnBuild It podcast in 50 years on YouTube, right? Did we have it right when we talked about our crystal ball and where were we going?
So I am pleasantly surprised, buddy.
That's what I'm here for, man.
I was too.
So should we just do round robin?
Sure.
Jay?
My second one is not necessarily a book about building, but it is about building. And it's Michael Mayle, I think is his name, A Year in Provence. And it's a book that I give with a sense of humor. Peter Mayle, that's his name. With a sense of humor to all my large renovation clients. And it's a story of a couple from England moving to Provence, France, buying an old home, and the first year that they lived there trying to renovate and learn the culture and learn the language and exist someplace not in their regular environment. And it's once you read it, it's a very humorous thing for me to pass out to clients, for me, maybe not necessarily them, but it really is about deciding what's important in life and what you should worry about and what you should panic over. And it's one that, it's probably the book that I've read the most in my entire life. I've probably read it 10 or 15 times.
What kind of feedback do you get from your clients about the book?
I've had quite a few people just like really say like, this is really nice.
Yeah.
You know, just really puts things into perspective.
Started that
Very
fire really good.
Philosophical approach to what we do, you know.
That's cool. So it's called
A Year in Provence.
A Year in Provence
Yep.
by Peter Mayle.
Yep. And it's a quick read too. And it's also probably 30 years old now.
Cool.
It's not necessarily recent.
So my second choice is a book called Water in Buildings by William Rose. And for those of you who don't know, Bill Rose is probably the leading building scientist on institutional buildings, particularly older historic
Mass wall.
buildings. Most of them are all mass wall buildings. But he's also a building science historian. So the Water in Buildings book has a tremendous amount of research into things like how did we get the ratio for venting roofs and crawl spaces? Where did that originate? And is it based on science or not? And so
Is it based on some guy at the code office going, you know, it'll cover.
And so he's kind of a Renaissance guy. Bill Rose was originally a cabinet maker in Maryland, and ultimately ended up studying architecture and becoming a professor at the University of Illinois Champaign. And he's just the go-to guy for all of us in terms of the historical development of building science. He's also a really great musician. So he's also a really good writer. So it's a pretty easy read, even though it gets quite technical. Wow. Bill Rose, Water in Buildings. You got another one?
So what's pretty amazing, when we initially talked about this topic, I didn't have any. Three more came to mind.
Very cool.
Books. So the next one is The Most Beautiful House in the World. It's written by Witold Rybczynski, who was an architect for...
He made that up.
Look it up.
I'm just kidding.
Look it up.
The most beautiful house in the world.
Yeah. He's an architect at McGill, I believe, University.
Another Canadian.
Yeah, I mean, he might not be there anymore. It's a relatively older book. But he embarks on building a barn or boathouse to build a boat in. And as he's building this building, he builds it so beautiful, it becomes his house. Like, he just can't fail to turn it over.
It's supposed to be for his boat. It ends up to be for him.
It ends up, right. And all along, he provides these anecdotal stories that are just different references about, like, the Pompidou and all this stuff. So it's like an architectural theory class along his journey. So it's a real easy read, but it's very entertaining. And
The most beautiful house in the world.
When did this
no
book
idea.
come into your life? Is this a young inspiration
it was
book?
Probably, I think we had to read it when I was in architecture school. So it was probably like early 90s.
And it was inspiring then.
And it was inspiring then. Yeah, it was really cool. And listen, I'm the first one to say that reading is probably one of my least favorite passions in the world. And so for me to say I really like the book is saying something.
Cool.
Okay.
Nice.
My next one, my last one on my list, is almost kind of a cheat. But the freaking...
So you had a non-book,
Yep.
a cheat.
Yep. And
Like,
another one now.
yeah.
You ready?
Can we just get like a real book?
Yeah. The code book. How many freaking builders, framers, everything do you know that have never even held the code book,
I knew there
and
was a
yet
reason
they're
I hated
supposed to
you.
be doing things the right way, and they've never even bothered to look up what the right way is to do something?
Like you.
You know you're on the wrong side of this one. It's the code book. It really is.
You know what's really cool about that is you completely blindsided me. You are an unpredictable guy, but that's pretty cool. I would never have thought to choose the code book. But
I
now
learned
kind of
more
wish
once
I
I
had.
bought one and started looking things up. I learned so much more about how we were supposed to be putting things together, that kind of stuff. And tab it. Put the tabs in, because then that makes things easier
So
to find.
you read the hard copy?
Not cover to cover.
No, but because
But yes, I can't do the online.
I see. What's really weird is I can't use the code
I get
book.
the hard copy with the commentary.
The commentary is really cool, but I like to do it electronically so I can search by terms. You know, like I went in once and tried to, what was it? There was a term, weather resistant barrier, water resistant barrier, water resistive barrier, and I searched in the code. All three terms are in there.
Yeah.
Like, why couldn't you do a word search and make sure they all align and pick one term for WRB?
Yeah,
I don't read the code book because I exceed it by 25% in most things I do anyway. So
His code book's 25% longer than everybody
Yes, it
else's.
is.
it's like, yeah, I don't want to read what I have to do. I know what I have to do.
But I really do, like, if you want to know how to be a better builder, know what the code book says.
Yeah.
I really do think that that's true. So,
I'm teasing you.
Good one. I totally caught me off guard.
thank you.
Yeah, I wouldn't go that far.
So,
But
my third one is a book called How Buildings Learn by Stuart Brand. And he's not a building guy, he's a kind of a philosopher. But he really has a completely unique way of looking at buildings, particularly since he calls them studies over time. And that architecture is about the durability of structures, but it's also about how they change over time. And he has what are called shearing layers. So he looks at the things that are easy to change and make the building adaptable, because buildings have to be both durable, but if they're going to last a long time, they have to be
Fit the
They
needs.
can change, right?
Yep.
And my perspective on looking at buildings changed a lot when I read his book, How Buildings Learn. He's also got some pretty cool stuff that's on YouTube that is, I think, maybe just as good, if not better, than reading the book. Because when I read his book, I was like, I'd really like to, you know how you think, I wonder who this author is, what he looks like, what he talks like. It's neat to see,
To be able to go and check that.
yeah, how because he writes real well, but seeing him say the same words is kind of neat.
very interesting.
Do you have a third?
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
Oh, I have a fourth and fifth too. I'm on a roll.
He's exceeding our expectations.
So my number 3 is simply called Home. I forget who the author is. It's a paperback. But what it basically is the history of domesticity.
Oh, cool.
And you guys have an inside joke you want to
Yes,
share?
We're
get
very
there.
sorry.
We'll get there. Go
Home.
ahead.
Home. The history of domesticity. So it goes through history and helps us understand the house, right? And it's sitting in the present, reading about the past to identify the future. But it's interesting because we all grew up in houses. Obviously, the culture has changed a little, right? The family room, like probably pre-1985 or so, there's probably no such thing as a kitchen island, right? Things like that. But when you read this book, you identify that, in, say, the late 1800s in Europe, most houses were like a single room, right? You pulled the chairs off from the edge of the wall, you had dinner, then you put the chairs there, and over in the corner you went to bed, but you were in the same room.
Yeah.
And as history would tell it, privacy became an issue, kind of super privacy became an issue where everybody gets their own bedroom. But it's a really good book to understand, like, how did we get from sleeping in a tent or a cave as a family unit to now everybody has their own bathroom, attached to a bedroom, and the kitchen has this island.
Who's the author again?
I don't have that.
So it's called Home, the history of
It's Home, but it's a history of domesticity, but the book is just called Home.
Cool.
Very cool. Peter and I were high-fiving because we wrote down the same one. I'll let you...
Seriously? You want me to take that one?
And I'm going to give you another one that I think you and I have talked about. The World in a Grain. And it really is a survey about how we're running out of construction sand. And that's going to be
the world in a grain?
Yeah, and that's going to be the
I
challenge
there's
that we
nights I
face.
don't sleep because I worry about when we're going to run out of
But it's
construction.
very interesting.
We really are going to run out of construction sand?
Yeah. And,
Wow.
and the whole basis is everybody goes, well, what about all the deserts? That's wind-blown aggregate, and it's smooth, and we need rocky-looking aggregate out of our sand, and it
So you
needs
don't
to be
think
tumbled
somewhere
by
we'll be
water.
able to take desert sand, tumble it, and make it a
Maybe,
little
but
closer?
it sounds to me like one of the conversations of, well, yeah, but there's tons of water. Why don't we just take all the salt out of it? Like, it's not as easy as we just tumble this
Well, it's not as
tens
economical
of millions of
at the
metric
moment.
tons of sand.
But at some point, it becomes economical.
But who would have thought that a resource that you could deplete would be a certain type of sand?
Like I said,
Yeah.
there's probably at least once a
But
week
then
I'm not sleeping.
also think about like where we are right now. There's cameras that have glass on them. There's a clock that has glass
Right,
on it.
right.
There's windows. We drove here in a car that had glass in it, on a road that had, not glass, that had sand in it, on a road that had sand in it. We're in a building that has sand in the foundation because of the concrete. Like,
Yeah.
it is really intertwined in everything we do, from silicon chips in computers to concrete to skyscraper glass.
So it was, again, the title?
The World in a Grain.
And do you remember the author? Or?
No, I don't. I can.
It's easy to look up.
We'll put it in the comments. We'll put it down below.
Yeah, that's amazing.
We'll find and link to every one of these books down below.
So just real quick, I'll say that the book that we both chose is a book called Never Home Alone by Robert Dunn, I think it is. He's a professor in, I think it's North Carolina State, but if it's University of North Carolina, they're going to be really angry at me.
Yeah, that's the same thing.
It's a
Anyway,
North Carolina college.
It's a North Carolina university, yeah.
University.
Anyway, the book is Never Home Alone is all about all the things that we live with. It's kind of a study of the inside of buildings as an ecosystem and how critical it is that we not kill off everything that's inside the building.
Yep.
That if you have very sterile environments, you have kids that are not developing immunities. So it's a fascinating look at the ecosystems inside buildings, how they're similar, how they are different, how they change over time. And I don't know. I reviewed the book for Green Building Advisor and it's just a really great read.
Yeah, and when I read it, like the next time I saw you, I was like, "Oh, hey Peter, you should know about this book." And you're like, "Yeah, I just reviewed it for GPA." And I was like, oh, "Damn, I thought I was going to tell you about something that was cool that you didn't know about yet." Yeah. And it's like everything from cockroaches to the microbiome that exists in your water heater.
Yeah.
Like, it really is a broad spectrum approach to, like,
book.
Well, and it starts.
it's really quite interesting. I know Peter's not selling it very well.
And the first chapter is Leeuwenhoek, who invented some of the earliest microscopes.
Yeah.
And where did he what did he study? He studied stuff inside
Yeah.
the building. And the point that the author makes is that since that happened in the 1600s, we have not looked at the environments inside buildings like what happened 400 years ago. Top that, my friend.
I already did. My first 3.
That's what I was about to say. 3 times. He's going to take credit for 3 times. Do you want to wrap us up with one more?
Yeah, I will. This one is more of it's a non-building book. And he's written a whole series that I've actually read most of them. But Malcolm Gladwell, the Tipping Point. And it's a book about what gets things over the tipping point. Like, how do some things become successful and some things not, right? Like, why are some kids better at this sport than others? For example, he cites U.S. kids hockey players. If you were born in like September or October, I believe, as opposed to January or February, you have the chance of becoming a better hockey player.
You're more likely to wind up in the NHL.
Yeah, because the January, February kids, they're younger than the September. The September ones, they're older in their age bracket, which allows them to be
More developed.
more
for the same-
developed and
garner more attention.
The difference between 21 and say 22 or 23-year-olds, there's probably not much of a difference. But when you're 6 or 7 years old, 6 months of development is huge. And so the older kids, they get more attention, but they're just better. So they get placed on the A team where the other kids get placed on the C team. The A team plays better teams, so they get better experience, they get better coaches, and they get more ice time. So the whole system is set up that better kids get better and the other kids don't necessarily get better. But he did like European women's soccer teams, and it's the whole thing is a lot of it is accounted for by age and when you start playing and when are deadlines for age brackets and stuff like that. But he also talks about things like why was Sesame Street a very successful kids show, but other kids shows come and go. But that one lasted for as many years as it did, right? Or shoes or something. Why do some shoes take off or some fashions take off and some don't? But
it's really understanding like the chance occurrence sometimes. It's really understanding that the factors probably aren't what you think they are.
Yeah, it's not
So
because
thinking
like
outside
that
the box.
this was better. It's just it hit, right? Some of it is hitting things at the right time. And is America ready for it, right? It's like the iPad. There's I can't remember the name of the company, but there was a company that was a couple years ahead of them. It was like Steel something. Anyways, I watched a documentary of this guy. He stood up on stage and basically talked about the iPad and the iPhone. Like, wouldn't it be great if we were able to do this maps and this and that? The company went out of business because people slammed them. The stuff's too expensive, blah, blah, blah. Like 5 years later, who's the guy from Apple?
Steve Jobs?
Steve Jobs. Basically, they have him on stage saying the same speech, and it takes off.
Yeah.
Why is that?
Just timing
right?
the tipping
In that
point.
case, it was totally timing controlled the tipping point. And it's like, you just try and understand things in, how do I relate that to the building industry or what do we do? Like, why all of a sudden is everybody fascinated about this facet of architectural design? Or why is the modern farmhouse like 9 out of 10 houses being built in America today?
So Malcolm Gladwell.
Malcolm Gladwell. I
And
believe
Tipping
his name.
Point.
He's a
Tipping
good
Point.
blanket. You can read anything by Malcolm Gladwell.
Yeah, he has outliers and he has like 4 or 5 books that kind of continue the sequence.
Oh, that's cool. So you just went from recommending a book to recommending an author.
A series,
Cool.
basically, yeah.
New York Times bestseller. He also just wrote one called Talking to Strangers. That's fantastic too. That's basically like we don't understand what someone else is going through, and that's the cause of most conflict in the world.
Well, so I just learned a lot during this UnBuild It podcast. We hope you did too, and we hope you can Send us your favorite books so we can talk about them next time. Thank you.
You got it.
Have a good day.